Hey everyone, welcome back to the Luminous Arts podcast. In this episode, I sit down with my friend Nathan Lachenmyer to talk about his work as a creative technologist. He started his career at MIT in my hometown of Boston, which is actually how I met Nathan in the first place. He's a super talented creator, and he's worked on some iconic installations at the Dana Farber Institute and the Tate Modern. His work with kinetic sculptures early on informed some of his more recent work, incorporating machine learning with robotic, free-floating artificial life forms at the Tate. It's pretty wild stuff. It's super cool to talk with Nathan about how his career has progressed since finishing school. Our conversation was so natural and easy. We both know many of the same people. It's an interesting dive into some unique parts of the new media art scene, and I think you're going to love listening to us jam.
Year or two.
Yeah, well, I mean, you have to, because
you're just spending so much time on a, speaker and on a screen that everyone's like, okay, well, I want to sound good, and I don't want to sound like I'm on my MacBook Pro.
Yeah. Well, I mean, everybody just sits all day staring at a screen, talking to a screen. And, I was thinking about that the other day, like how much time I've spent like talking into this monitor. And it is literally like the past 2 years.
Oh, yeah. I mean, gosh, like, I feel like I could count the number of work meetings, particularly like that I've had in person, like on one hand in the past 2 years. Like, it's just absolutely insane.
You mean in-person work meetings?
Hold on. I mean, like in-person work meetings, like on one hand. I try super hard to see my friends and people in person because I just have so much Zoom fatigue. I'm just like looking at someone on a screen. I'm just like, this just feels like what I've done for 8 hours today already.
Yeah, no, like it really helps to switch gears though. I try and like when I'm done with work, I'll try and go and do some kind of like physical activity. Like I'm really into climbing, so I'll go climb or I'll like work out and that like cardiovascular activity will like shake my brain out of the cobwebs of just sitting. And then, like if I want to socialize, I actually don't mind talking to friends this way. I found that over the pandemic, I actually caught up with a lot of friends that I hadn't seen in many, many years just because, I mean, I was like in the mode of like, oh, hey, let's just do a Zoom, or let's catch up. And it's so easy because it's like, it's just Zoom time now and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
It's also like, I would much rather sit face to face with people and have an actual conversation. But I don't mind.
I've just been calling people old school phone calls, which feels kind of quaint in the year 2022.
Yeah, it is a little strange. It was weird when like my mom was like, "Hey, let's Zoom," and I'm like, "Oh, is that where we are? Is that where society is now?" Like, like, all right, Mom, I let you onto my Facebook and my Instagram, and now we're gonna start Zooming together. Is this what's happening? It's like, okay.
Oh yeah, there was a while with my family where they were like, "Okay, like Sunday at 5 p.m. we're gonna have a family Zoom," and I was just like, "This is terrible. This is like literally the worst now. Now that it's scheduled on my calendar every week."
Yeah. Well, it reminds me of it almost reminds me of landlines. You remember like when we were kids and everybody had a landline and like your sister was like, "Get off the phone. I'm trying to talk to my boyfriend," or whatever it was, right? And like there was this one thing and like, it was the landline. I don't know if you've had this experience where like you're on a Zoom and then somebody else, like for me, I've got employees and like my employee will try and use the Zoom and it'll like boot me off, or like he can't use it or she can't use it because I'm on it. And I'm like, wow, this is total landline status.
Yeah,
from like
really early on, we had some of that going on where we'd have back-to-back meetings and like we hadn't quite figured out how to like do it because we were just using our personal rooms, right? Yeah. And you're like, oh shit, like, the next meeting's coming into the room now.
Right, exactly. But you were, wait, virtual rooms or physical rooms?
Virtual rooms on Zoom.
Okay.
That is like when you have your personal room, like your meeting ID that's constant from meeting to meeting to meeting.
Oh, yeah, I don't.
So then, like, you could be having a meeting with one client, and if it goes 5 minutes over, the next client hops into the same meeting, and you're like, oh, shit.
Yeah, I always make a new ID. Like I always do, because all my Zooms are like scheduled through Google Calendar. Yeah. And whenever you you like create a new meeting, it like makes a new room. So I haven't had that, but I've definitely ended up in other people's Zooms. Oh, so just a note. This is kind of weird because like I just started the recording, but we were like bantering and it felt natural, so I just decided to start. We don't
I
do
can see it
video.
on the bottom. So
Yeah. Like we don't do like the video doesn't come through in the podcast. It's
yeah,
just our voice. Like I like to be talking to people face to face, so I always try and keep the video.
it helps. Yeah,
Well, it does. It makes it feel like we're in the same place. You know what I
yeah,
mean? But yeah, I'm glad that you decided to. We finally figured out a time to do this. It's
yeah.
I actually I've been on, I was on a roll and then I like stopped. And for the past like 2 months, I haven't done anything. And then 2 days ago, I did one with Christopher Bowder. Do you know him
No, I
from
don't.
White? He has a company called White Void in Berlin, and they do some really really crazy kinetic art. Man, you should check it out. He's
I
really
will. That sounds cool.
yeah, it's White Void, and he's really OG too. He he's probably I don't even know like 5 or 10 years older than I am, but he we were just we were we were talking about our experiences growing up, and he was telling me about the rave scene in Berlin and how that kind of um, the 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 angst of being part of an underground scene that was counterculture and kind of being stomped on gave him motivation as a visual artist to express himself in the way that he was. And I could relate to that so much because back in Boston, it was like the rave scene there and the asylum and VJing and like that whole thing. And it
Hmm.
was like, well, I think that's why visual arts were so appealing to me, because they were slightly taboo, because they were associated with a slightly taboo scene. And yeah, it was
That's
just
really
interesting.
interesting.
Yeah, it was cool to hear how his progression happened as an artist. And I'm like, wow, like all the way over in Berlin, and it was the same kind of motivation almost, or the same like drive. I
Hmm.
think
That's really interesting, and it seems like that might be a slight generational thing because I think I'm probably like 7, 8 years younger than you, and by the
mm,
time that I felt like I was a part of the same scene in Boston, right? It didn't. I don't know. It didn't have it. I feel like things had started to break into the mainstream in a way that it didn't feel taboo anymore.
yeah,
And it felt like, it still felt kind of. It felt like a legitimate art form, right? It felt like it kind of gone from like weird stuff that people were doing like in a warehouse or something into something that was like just becoming mainstream and just becoming like accepted enough as like a real form of art. So it's
yeah.
kind of interesting that there was a transition going on there.
Well, you were also part of the MIT scene, and were you in the media lab, the MIT media labs?
No, just regular old boring MIT.
Oh, it's standard MIT. I see.
Standard MIT, not the media lab.
Right. Well, yeah, I think that there's a MIT is a really special environment, and I didn't go to MIT, but I was very much a part of that scene during my time in Boston, and there was MIT fosters this acceptance of technology, and to a certain
Hmm.
degree, an acceptance and an encouragement of creative thinking with technology that and it's also a pipeline into industry. So I think in that way, there's almost this path that's laid out for creative technologists who go to MIT, where it's like, okay, yeah, you're thinking outside the box and you're doing weird things, but there's this there's this outlet to industry that exists that you can tap into if you so choose.
Yeah.
And I don't know if like the legend of Frostbite and
Hmm.
his the blue
Enter.
LED. Yeah, man, and how he came up in that environment, being a total like deviant raver who also happened to work for Color Kinetics and
Hmm.
invent the blue diode, which allowed RGB LEDs to be a thing, which allowed video, which really like opened up an entire industry.
Yeah, it was just, yeah. I mean, the stuff that was going on, especially with color kinetics and, frostbite in that scene in particular at that time was, to me, it's mind-boggling to think about just how many different things were intersecting all at the same time, right? That there was kind of this rave scene, this underground art scene, this industrial like technology being developed, and all these things were kind of interwoven at one place in time.
Yeah. That's a legend. That's like a really, I'm proud to have been part of that piece of history at that point in time. You know what I mean? Like that, that was a really like monumental part of new media art history. I feel, like just,
Yeah. I
and
mean, I did certainly feel the same way, that especially for a lot of modern, multimedia art, a lot of modern LED art in particular kind of owes its lineage to that period of time.
it totally does, man. And that particular group of friends and that, that social scene. And I wasn't even like super deep into it, but I was, I went to the warehouse, I saw the art that he had created, and it was really cool. And it's just a very
Yeah,
interesting
absolutely.
time.
And that's definitely I think you're right in calling it out, that that's a very particular MIT kind of thing. Like, I think, people would call it interdisciplinary or, whatever, but it's really that there's a lot of comfort with experimentation and a lot of comfort with taking things that feel like maybe they're two totally different areas and saying like, hey, what happens if I, try to combine these? Like,
Yeah.
what happens if I take, LEDs and I start combining it with neuroscience to make, persistence of vision art? Or like, what happens if I take, all this stuff that we're doing about blue diodes and, solid state physics, and now taking this over into the lighting and theatrical and, artistic industries?
Yeah. I think MIT really, people like creative people gravitate towards MIT, creative technologists, people who are very, very smart and very like odd. I don't know how else to explain it. Like I know so
Mm-hmm.
many fascinating, just really interesting people who have gone to MIT, and it feels like home when you talk to them and like, oh yeah, like I know those places, I know that scene, I know those people.
Definitely.
Um, MIT is a really really cool environment. Do you ever go back? You ever like go back, and do you ever do like senior house stuff or?
Oh, well, before the pandemic, I had always lived in the East Coast ever since I went to MIT. I was always living in either Boston or New York. So
Yeah.
I went back at least for Steeroast every year, if not more often than that, just a couple of different times. There was still faculty and staff that I kept in touch with. But, since the pandemic now, I haven't really gone. I mean, the Institute's not even really open anymore.
What, the institute? What do you mean?
Or MIT, like MIT is just not even really, like, the campus isn't like,
Oh right.
they're closed to only students, and you have to have a student ID to even go through the halls, which feels crazy. It feels crazy to me now because MIT has such a long history of being an open campus and not having security and not having to swipe ID cards to go in, and having public Wi-Fi, and kind of having this presence as a public institution in Cambridge, where
Yeah.
somewhere like Harvard, it's like it's a lot more normal that you go there and the gate's locked or the doors are closed, and you need to kind of be, a member of the campus to be welcome into the buildings.
No, I remember going to parties there all the time, like all the time.
Yeah.
In my late teens, that was all of the alphabet soup of psychedelics was coming coming out of those hallways. um, yeah, I mean, I guess COVID changed everything, and I was actually going to say it's MIT has always been incredibly different than other campuses because of how open it felt. And there was a reason to go there because there were cool people doing cool things there. There were interesting people having interesting parties in the halls of MIT. Whereas Harvard, it's like I didn't really know anybody cool who was going to Harvard. I'm sure there's lots of cool people who go to Harvard, but like I didn't know them, and it always felt much more like closed off. And just not really like a place where you
I mean,
want
I think
to go.
even into the social space, I think there's that same mentality of people being interested in trying new things, meeting new people, and it's like, hey, you're cool. Like, what do you think about this? Like, come on, hang out, and let's see, like, what we have in common and what we're interested in.
Yeah, absolutely. So what years did you go to MIT?
2006 to 2012.
Okay,
So
yeah.
I was there for 6 years. I was there for 2006 and 2010, getting my undergrad degrees, and then I stuck around for 2 more years till 2012 and got my master's.
Nice. And what did you get your degrees in?
My undergraduate degree is in. I'm going to sound totally ridiculous. I have 3 undergraduate degrees.
I mean, that's kind of amazing.
No, 2 undergraduate degrees. I have physics and electrical engineering and computer science are one program at MIT because they actually have an integrated approach where they feel like you have to know both. And that feels it feels kind of duh now that it's like, yeah, you can't do any hardware without knowing software, and pretty much all software you need to know something about the hardware. But they've been doing it since the 80s, and it was a pretty innovative approach at the time. And then I stuck around. I got my master's in electrical engineering afterwards.
Nice. That's a fucking powerful combo, man. It really is. It really is. And then what'd you get? So that was your master's, was electrical engineering, or? Nice.
Yeah,
and then
actually was focusing in control systems and instrumentation. So my academic background, I was building equipment for laboratories to make measurements on really tiny and sensitive natural systems. So like atoms or neurons or things like that, figuring out how you can measure the current in the neuron or the, light being output by an atom and things like that.
Yeah. Interesting. And so when you graduated, did you stick around Boston or did you get the hell out of there?
I was in Boston for 12 years after I graduated. So
okay, wow, yeah, that's because I always associated you with Boston. We actually met at the Glitch Loft.
Yeah.
During some party there, not like well after I had moved to the West Coast. I went back to visit, and
I think it was Glitchgiving.
Was it? Yeah, it was something like that. Because you weren't living there though, were you? No, but you were going there. And did you like jump right into new media arts when you left school, or did you like? Yeah,
it was a weird like overlap that was happening that I think just because of Frostbite and kind of that generation of older students and people in the MIT community that kind of had this connection to Burning Man and making these new media art projects, they were connected with all the other people in the Boston area that were also interested in this. And just I think around my senior year and in grad school, I'd started to kind of meet people outside of the MIT circle for the first time that were also interested in these things, and started going to parties, going to warehouses, going to Cyphoria, like going to Firefly, like going to all the things that were happening, and like seeing all of the other artists and technologists and people that were doing really cool things. And I think that it was definitely kind of a moonlighting and daylighting kind of situation where I was like a research scientist at MIT by day, and by night I was on the weekends I was going to raves and VJing and doing all this other stuff. And I think it was just kind of a slow shift where I was realizing like that I could use all of my skills in technology, and all these things that I was learning in a research lab gave me the thinking and the tools to actually express myself as an artist as well, which is something that I'd never really thought of myself as before. Like I'd always thought of myself as an engineer, as a scientist, as kind of like very rationally minded and not, qualitative or creatively minded before that time. And I think by the time I graduated, I was starting to have a little bit of that crisis of like, well, what do I want to do now? Now I can't. I'm kind of at the crossroads where I can't do both at the same time. I need to either figure out what I want to do as a profession and figure out what skills I want to continue refining. And I just decided and kind of jumped into the creative tech world and figured, let's try this out and see how this goes. And I can always kind of go back to research as a fallback if this isn't an actual career path that'll work. But
Yeah, that's always the gamble, right? It's like, I'm gonna try this. We'll see how it works.
Yeah, it's like, this sounds fun and seems like a really great creative outlet. I don't know if this will like pay the bills and pay my rent, but let's see what happens.
So when did that happen in Boston? Did you like start
Mhm.
working for a firm or?
Yeah, so my first creative technology job was actually with Nervous System, which
Huh,
is a
I didn't know
generative
that.
jewelry company that's started by two MIT alumni who actually lived at Senior House, Jessica Rosencrantz and Jesse Lewis Rosenberg.
I know Jessica Rosencrantz.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So she was doing her architecture degree at MIT and was laser cutting and using all these rapid prototyping techniques, and kind of as was the academic fad at the time, was interested in biologically inspired systems,
Mm-hmm.
and eventually just took her work in the direction of, instead of using biology for architecture, using biology for product design and for jewelry and objects like that. So they have a
I mean,
whole
they're almost one and the same. It's just like
Mhm.
jewelry and product design is just architecture on a smaller scale. Like good architecture, or excuse me, good product design should use the same concepts and appreciation of natural form as architecture.
Absolutely. I mean, I have a very holistic view of design, which I feel like most people who hear about design don't even really think about what design actually is. They think of it as primarily a visual or aesthetic thing.
Yeah.
And I think of design almost as I think of it almost as a subset of psychology or anthropology, right? Where it's really a thinking of you have the way that the human mind works, and you have all of your senses that you experience with the world around you. How can you intentionally use the senses to accommodate what you want to communicate with someone, whether it's how you want them to use an object, how you want them to use a space, how you want them to flow through a space. Like, so much of what happens with design happens on a subconscious level, where you're not even really thinking about it. It's just kind of like it happens, where you grab the right part of an object, or you move the right way in a building.
You're describing UX design, and like
Yeah.
one of my good friends is going. She's getting a master's in anthropology now, and she is thinking about going into UX design afterwards. And another friend of mine is who graduated with a degree in psychology and did the
Mhm.
same thing. And then yeah, it's just there's so much of the human psyche in the way we interact with things and design things. It's almost like you could do a degree in you could have like a science-based degree in like physics and material design, and then complement that with psychology or anthropology, and have like a killer foundation for going into UX design.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's part of what's personally the appeal of design to me, is that it's combining these very technical, logical, rational, like objective, like science and engineering skills. But if you don't want them to just be abstract mathematics or abstract research, and you want to actually be able to do something that affects people,
You
you
have
have
to
to
apply them to
understand.
people.
Yeah, exactly. If you want to make a product that people use, you have to understand how people think. You can't just say this is objectively the perfect product because it meets all of these, quantitative criteria, if you don't actually think about how does it make people feel? How will people
Right.
feel using it?
Yeah, of course, absolutely, and that goes into everything that we do. I think that's a great foundation for the beginning of a design studio. You know, yeah. If I was starting a design studio and UX design, I would find I'd find students with that background.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
So when did you move from jewelry making into more like the only work that I know that you've done? Well, I know three pieces actually. I know I know Kinetic Rain that you were part of, but I keep meeting other people who are part of that project. I was talking to Christopher Bowder the other day and he was like, "Oh yeah, I know like one of the designers of that project." Like,
So I
that's
wasn't
funny.
a part of Kinetic Rain, but I was a part of a very similar project in Boston. Um,
Oh.
oh gosh, what was it called?
misrepresenting you this whole time, man.
There was a kinetic sculpture at the Biogen IDEC lobby
Okay.
in Cambridge. Breaking Wave is what it was called. And I
Okay.
did that when I was at Small Design Firm. That was actually in collaboration with Jeff Lieberman. And he did the kind of conceptual design for it and built it in collaboration with Hypersonic Design in Brooklyn, who's another kinetic sculpture company.
Yeah, you hooked me up with them. You connected me with them.
To Gwillem, who was one of their lead engineers.
Yeah, and I like kind of went down that path for a minute. They dissolved. They like kind of exploded or something happened. They don't exist anymore. But really fascinating guy for sure. So you worked with them, and then you did that installation that was there in Boston.
Yeah, exactly. So after I moved from jewelry making, I worked with David Small, who's an ex-Media Lab professor, at his company, Small Design Firm, which was a small design firm, but was also a design firm owned by David Small.
Sure. That's great.
Great name. When you got a last name like Small, you really you got to own it.
You do. You got to play it up.
So he ran a interactive media design company that focused on dynamic typography and interactive environments. So a lot of the work that we did was based for museums on kind of thinking of interactive environments and multimedia ways to communicate text information. Though occasionally we would also do kind of more artistic and poetic projects. And, we would do interactive environments for Cirque du Soleil. We did some stuff for the Nobel Peace Prize. We did a couple of other different kind of projects that were less about communicating information and were more about just kind of the feeling of design and the feeling of a space. So I did that for probably 5 years afterwards.
What did you do with Cirque?
So we worked on this really interesting project right up my alley, given my background in kind of the music scene in Boston, where Cirque was working on this project called Sama Sama with an Israeli group. And the idea is that instead of a show where you kind of go and you sit down and you're the audience for the show, you sit down and you watch it, it was almost a cross between a theme park and a party, where you'd show up and at the very beginning of the evening, there would be kind of this opening show that would kind of set up the narrative of this performance and this evening you're going to have. And then at the end of this introductory show, the lights go on and you realize that you're in this giant indoor theme park and just go like run around and play. And
oh my god, it's such a great idea. It's almost like Sleep No More crossed with
yeah, it's like Sleep No More in like a stadium.
Wow.
And the idea was that all of the different activities were all tied together by this idea of making music collaboratively with each other. So there was one kind of attraction, for lack of a better word, that was all about drums and rhythm. And you can go and there might be attendants, there might be actors, maybe there was interactive media that would kind of show you how to play the drums and make the music that they wanted you to make. And you would actually be playing through kind of participating in this attraction. You'd be making the rhythm line that would be playing in the music for the night.
That's like a collaborative Blue Man Group.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, what if Blue Man Group was for 500 people and like 20 people had to collaborate and do the drums, 20 people had to do the horns, 20 people had to go do the strings, and it kind of just was cycling throughout the night. And you just, you had 2 or 3 hours to kind of run around and do all the attractions, and then there was kind of a closing show at the end.
When I first moved to the West Coast, I collaborated with this artist up in Ashland, Ashland, California, or Ashland, Oregon. It's like right on the border. Anyway, collaborated on this installation with this guy, Corn Dog. He's like a metal sculptor, and it was a giant instrument. Kind of, it reminds me of that. It's like along those lines, where you just have a massive group of people come up and they'd be playing this instrument, and there was the guts of a piano, or a couple of guts of pianos, and then there were like all of these sawed off oxygen tanks, and then there was like a xylophone, and some kind of stringed instrument, and it was all welded to these giant steel rings. It was
Mm-hmm.
very like come play with sound and like make music together.
Exactly. And it was just so interesting to see kind of this idea come to life of, instead of having an instrument, like what if the building was an instrument, right? Like
Yeah.
what if the space was an instrument? What if the instrument wasn't a thing that you picked up and held?
Right, absolutely. It's a fascinating idea. I think that there could be some kind of electronic equivalent, especially like in COVID days, you know what I mean, where it's just everybody is collaboratively making music digitally.
Mm-hmm.
Could be really cool. So you worked on that installation,
Yep.
like an instrument of some kind, or?
Yeah, I worked on two of the attractions that were a part of this kind of theme park. So one of them was based off of the idea of conducting. So everyone got a conductor's wand in the group, and
Uh-huh.
you would kind of conduct the virtual symphony to create the music.
Yeah.
And then the other one I made was a projection mapped floor that was it was called the heart, and the idea is that it was kind of the town square of the theme park, and it was the
Mm.
center where people could come to, and it was an unstructured activity. So all the other activities had kind of music or sheet music that you were supposed to try to play along with. This one was really just meant to be the kind of break area where you could go, you kind of have free form fun, and as you walked around, you were tracked where you were on the floor, and projections would color the floor based off of where you've been and what you were doing, and then connections would be made with you and other people that would make music.
Interesting. So when was this? Like what year? About?
2014 or 15, I want to say.
What were you using to do that kind of to create that kind of system? Like what software frameworks were you putting together to create that? Because now it would be Touch Designer would be an obvious choice.
Yeah, so gosh, the tools have developed so much and just so quickly. It's really
Oh
crazy.
no.
So at the time, we actually used a framework called SDF Windows, which was a proprietary framework for our company, for a small
Yeah.
design firm. And the
Huh.
reason is that even the tools that are newer, like processing is kind of the grandfather of all the tools, right? Cinder, open frameworks, or at least any of the programming tools.
It's been
Process.
around for a while, but has it been
Yeah,
around within Touch Designer? I don't know.
I don't know. I feel like Touch Designer kind of draws its lineage more from like the Max MSP or Pure Data lineage of tools with the patching, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's I don't know the answer to that. I'm genuinely curious. I'd love to talk to somebody who's like, where did this, what is the history of Touch Designer? How does that relate to processing?
Yeah. But to go back to it, we were using our own kind of C++ frameworks just because when David had started the company, there weren't any creative coding tools available. Kind of that's he's part of the
Right.
kind of the OG era of Media Lab researchers and professors and faculty, up there with like John Maida, Ben Fry, Casey Reese, like the people who were really kind of popularizing this stuff. So
Yeah.
on one hand, the tool was very closed because it was very homebrewed, so it wasn't like open frameworks or processing where everyone was knew the tools. But on
Hmm.
the other hand, it kind of had like a 5 year head start on a lot of those tools in terms of its sophistication.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. And is it around still?
No, I don't. It's kind of it's a closed source tool because there's no documentation. There's
Right.
nothing. Like the documentation is go ask Dave or go ask Mike how it works.
Well, I guess the real question is, where's Dave? Where's the small
Oh,
design firm?
he is retired on Martha's Vineyard and loving it.
Oh, nice. Oh, there you go. There you go. I love to hear about new media artists who retire and have a happy ending. I'm like, maybe that'll be me. Hopefully, knock on
Yeah.
wood. Maybe I'll retire somewhere nice someday and live somewhere like Martha's Vineyard and love it.
Hey, that's a dream. It's good to know that people have done it before us, so it's definitely possible.
Yeah, I think I would go insane right now. I'm definitely like I cannot sit still. Like retirement honestly sounds like a quasi nightmare. I'm like, what would I do? I know exactly what I would do. I would probably find some other project to like rabbit hole to dive into. And yeah.
Yeah, and it's weird that in some ways, especially the past 2 years, I feel like I've discovered that running my own business isn't that different from being retired. Like,
Well, I mean, you have a lot of
if I were
freedom.
retired, what would I do? It's like I'd want interesting stuff to do with other people that was intellectually stimulating, that used my skills, that made me feel like I was useful. And it's like that's what I do. That's how I run my business.
So you went from working for small design firm to like, where did Morphogen? So it's like Morphogen and Citra. Those are two names of company.
Satara, yeah.
What is it?
Satara.
Citara. Oh,
Yeah.
interesting. Looks like Citra. Anyway, Citara.
Yeah,
Two
so
companies that you're
Morphogen was
associated
just
with.
kind of the Morphogen was just kind of my VJing alias for the
Okay.
years that I was doing that,
Yeah,
and that's
yeah.
based off of the things that I was interested in at the time. So morphogens are biological agents that cause change in patterns and texture and growth. And I was
Mm,
really interested in kind of applying the skills that I'd learned in simulation and control theory and that kind of field into making simulations that could create art. So kind of my earlier work and explorations was really in making math and simulations that created visually and aesthetically interesting images for VJing.
yeah. Interesting. That's
So
cool. I
that's
like
where
that.
that's where the morphogen names comes from. And then Satara Systems, Satara is star in Hindi.
Mhm.
So star systems, almost literally. That's the company that me and my business partner, also my wife, are doing our current work under. So that's
Nice.
more of doing kind of technology, user research, and design for um, immersive environments and interactive media.
Yeah, yeah. I was looking through the website. It's very cool, man. Like the installation you did with Cadillac is really impressive. And that was under Satara. That was part of.
That was the last project I did. So between Small Design Firm and Satara, there was one more stop, and that's what brought me to New York. And I worked with a company called Midnight Commercial, and it was a kind of an innovation consultancy that had been started up by MIT Media Lab alumni, and it was much more in the spirit of a marketing agency and kind of marketing type work. And it was actually a really good experience because I feel like my previous work was working with museums where a fast project is 12 months, and sometimes it's 2 or 3 years to get a project from concept to completion.
Yeah.
And the marketing world is just like the total opposite. It's like if they give you 3 months, that's a long lead time for being
Well,
able to
those are the two paradigms. You've got architectural placemaking, you got permanent, and then you've got marketing, which is very, very, transient and temporary. And
absolutely.
for almost all of the existence of digital ambience, we have stayed far, far away from marketing and agency work. That's changing now. But you've got companies, a company in New York, Bake Love. A friend of mine, Sophia, she used to work for them, and you know, they were doing all kinds of really unique
Hmm.
experiential installations. I think they're done
Yeah,
now.
they were bought by the New York Times and then they just closed down, I think, a year or change ago.
Yeah. Yeah. Sophia spun off before that, though. I
Mhm.
remember when she was on this podcast like a year plus ago, and she was like, yeah, I'm done. Like, okay. Um, anyway, yeah, New York has a number of really interesting, like experiential design firms that are playing with technology, doing unique things with new media, and are focused squarely at legacy brands and the agency world. I
Absolutely.
like I like the pacing of architecture. I really do like
Mhm.
permanent installations. I, Also, the work that we do, it's like our narrative is very emotional. It's not very contextual, and that lends itself to like creating vibe in a lobby or on a
Mhm.
facade. You know what I mean? It's like abstract emotional messaging through
Mhm.
lighting, essentially. Um,
Absolutely. And I think that's, that's where the tension is with a lot of the agency driven work is like you can't create emotion on demand. Right.
No,
It's
yeah,
not, you can't
and
be like, I'm going to pick a time, I'm going to pick a place, you're going to show up and make this emotion happen. And you got like 8 weeks to make it, to figure out how.
well, agencies also want contextual messaging, don't you think? Like an agency is like, in the end, they're like, buy our thingy, or you know what I mean, like pay attention to this brand, and there's oftentimes a real push for a more contextual message, and that's
Mm-hmm.
fine, but the medium that we work in is much more non-contextual.
Yeah,
So I've found that for us, yeah, it's just we tend to get gigs that are more abstract, and architectural placemaking is all about complementing the form of the architecture you're installing into. um,
absolutely. And I think for that reason, I've drifted away from a lot of the agency driven work, though I still have a soft spot for retail stores, like temporary or permanent installations in stores, because I think stores are just, again, kind of coming just from the psychological and anthropological and emotional perspective. Like I find stores fascinating, and they have that environmental presence where you can sometimes do something really interesting with them.
yeah, well, I mean, the pop-up, the concept of the pop-up, and now you've got like unused retail environments which are everywhere, and you've got large mall owners that are desperate to
Mhm.
fill these empty spaces. Like, who the fuck goes to the mall? Like, I don't even know. How are there any stores in malls right now? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a huge shift that I think is going to be really interesting to see how experienced designers approach that, because I think you're right that in a lot of ways the old model of shopping is kind of dead now. Like everyone,
Yeah,
like all the companies that didn't let you buy things online now are either gone or they figured out how to let you buy things online for pickup
yeah.
or for shipping or whatever. But if
Well, for
you're
better or
if you're
worse, people have discovered it's like getting out of your chair just to get a product is kind of a waste of time.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So the interesting part of this is if you're going for utilitarian products, right? Like if I need a light bulb and I need to go to Home Depot or
Oh yeah,
Target or whatever, right? Like you're just going to order online. You're going to get it shipped to you if you can, or maybe you'll pick it up on your way home so you can get it faster, right? Or you'll
yeah,
like drive up and just like do the like drive by pickup, right? Because you're like, I need this today. But
right.
there's still some areas of stores where you go there not because you want the product, but because you want the experience, right?
Right.
Because
And
you're like,
that is,
well, this is like the Apple Store model, right?
it is, it's also, what most big legacy brands are trying to do. Like you've got Nike outlets, then they're trying to make their product cool, and it's an experience when you go and buy it. I mean, Amazon has stores now. Have you seen these things? It's like an Amazon store, and they've got like knickknacks, like a spattering of Amazon products. And you just go in, and it's like, there's some nice people behind the counter. They're young and they're
Mhm.
hip and like blah blah blah. And then you've got like, a Peloton bike and a fucking radio, like a Bose stereo, and just all these random things. But it looks like an Apple store, and it is very much like the shopping experience. So
Yeah, so I think that's going to happen a lot more now that, first of all, there's just so much commercial retail that's empty. There's just so many storefronts that, if someone wants to do something interesting and take a risk, I feel like there's a lot more space available for it than there's ever been before.
so a good friend of mine, Shlomo,
I
he
know Shlomo
created,
actually.
yeah, he's a fucking cool guy, man.
Yeah,
He's
yeah.
also he also has been on this podcast. he he did an experience. He created a Meow Wolf esque. I don't want to insult it by calling it Meow Wolf esque, but it's from a layman's point of view, it's basically
Mhm.
the Meow Wolf business model. And he created this walkthrough environment. It's like beautiful. It's almost like
Mhm.
Avatar. It's like these beautiful glowing physical trippy alien plants that you
Yeah.
go and you touch and they react, and it's like he created his own hardware and software and like the whole thing. He created a tech demo and he deployed it at Gray Area Arts Foundation in San Francisco
Yeah.
with the intention of deploying this thing at the Westfield Mall in the Bay Area, because the Westfield Mall is anxious. They're desperate for experience. I don't know like where he is in that process, but I went and saw it at Gray Area. It was absolutely fantastic. It was a beautiful experience, and he did an amazing job.
Nocturne, right?
Okay, so it was Nocturne, and then I think, all right, this is like complete speculation, but I know that Meow Wolf came out with a Nocturne product shortly after he announced he was going to come out with his thing called Nocturne. So like maybe they were like cramping his style. There might've been some kind of like, experiential space turf war happening or whatever. But anyway, he had to change the name, and now it was Numerai X or I can't. I'm totally.
I think I've seen that. Yeah.
I really hope he does not listen to this. Anyway, it was like some shit went down, and he had to change the name, and it was another thing. And it just finished, but it was beautiful. Did you catch it? Did you get to see it?
No, I didn't, but I've heard really great things from so many friends in the Bay Area about it.
Yeah, it was. Well, it involved everybody, like literally an entire section of my friend group, like 100 people were working on this project at one point. It was just like, where are you going? They're like, oh, we're going down to work on the thing. And it's like, man, everybody's working on this.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did not work. I was like, it was a lot of work. So I was like super slammed at the time. But yeah, I've been talking to Shlomo about using the software that he developed, because it really is next level. Like the LED pattern engine that he developed. It incorporates like sensory input. You can do all kinds of generative content. You can network multiple nodes to create like a massive distributed pattern engine. It's some next level LED. Yeah, absolutely. How do we get on that tangent? I don't even remember.
I think we're talking about retail storefronts, commercial space being available.
Right. So what are some installations that you've done in the retail environment?
So when I was in New York, we actually did a lot of work with Cartier. And we did a lot of work with them on creating these kind of VIP experiences that they could use, because for the exact same reason that people don't come to a Cartier store because they need a watch, right? Like, they come to Cartier because they like the brand, they're in love with the brand, they want to be a part of the history and everything that it stands for. And in New York, they have a mansion, the Cartier mansion on Fifth Avenue, that's been there since God knows when. And the original mansion that the Cartier family bought when Central Park was still just a swamp.
Right. That's some history. Right there.
Yeah.
It's a status thing. There's like it's like Cadillac, Rolex. There's like a social status that goes along with those products, and that kind of lends itself to experience.
Absolutely.
Like shopping it's like the experience of like expressing your social capital.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's very much at that level, right? Because it's not about the utilitarian purposes of the object. It's not because you need sunglasses or you need a watch. Like, you're getting it because it's much more about, in some way, virtue signaling, right? About like what you believe in, what you stand for, like what club you want to affiliate yourself with.
Yeah.
But that's part of what I find so interesting about, luxury retail in particular, is because you're not selling objects, you're not selling products, you're selling identity to people. And it's really interesting to think about how you can use and leverage space and use immersive environments and use interactive technology to create these feelings, because that's really what people are buying, right? They're not buying the shoes, they're not buying the bag, they're buying the feeling of having been in the space and kind of being indoctrinated into this club or this group.
Right. So what were you Give me an example of an installation that you would do for Cartier, or like, yeah, how did that like manifest?
Yeah, so let me think. I think there's two really good projects that I liked that we did prototypes for them for. A lot of our work focused on user research, so it was really about building prototypes for them and testing things with their VIPs and kind of seeing what stuck as a good idea for a project.
Yeah.
One project we did was taking transparent LCD screens on kind of a hinge arm that you could bring over a jewelry case, and kind of as an augmented reality screen, it could show you information about the pieces that were in the case.
So I saw a piece that you did. I thought it was for Samsung or something, but dude, those LCDs are ridiculous. Like, what are those? It's like a piece
Yeah,
of glass. What
so
is that?
those are OLED screens. Yeah, those are organic LEDs that are grown on a sheet of glass.
I have never seen OLED in that form. That's crazy. It's
Yeah,
just like
it's nuts.
transparent. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a different project we did for the Olympic Village at the Korean Olympics. And that one was based off of that was more of a kind of a traditional marketing installation where the idea was really kind of showcasing the night side of the new Samsung Galaxy phones. But we tried
Yeah.
to make it interesting by kind of, instead of layering content like you do on Snapchat or whatever it is, where you kind of have like the glasses that go on, you have the background, but it's still a 2D image. We kind of
Yeah.
wanted to extrude that 2D image into 3D space. So
Sure.
we had 4 or 5 transparent screens stacked in front of each other, and you'd take like a little boomerang video of yourself, and you'd be living on the second or third layer, and you'd have these layers of screens that would have the different backdrops, and it kind of created this cool 2.5D experience where you could see the picture in multiple layers.
Yeah, man.
But
Postcards in space. That's classic. I love it.
yeah,
So do you remember like back in projection days when people would project through scrim,
yeah,
layers of scrim, and it was a similar effect. It was different. It was like the same image, but similar, like creating depth through flat layers.
yeah, that's actually a technique that we used to prototype the Samsung project that we were doing. We actually looked at using short throw projectors and multiple layers of scrim, and kind of just getting the throw and the angle just right so they didn't project onto each other, and using
Yeah,
multiple layers of scrim to get the 2.5D effect. But man,
that's
the
super cool.
OLEDs are just like, those transparent screens are just like so much more contrast than you can get projecting on the scrim. It's nuts.
Yeah, well, of course, and it's also you can put a different image on each one. So who is making like? How do you get? Is there a manufacturer that you were using, or is like custom, or how are you getting OLED screens in those form factors?
So that was a commercial product that Samsung made at the time.
Oh,
It was a
interesting.
business digital signage product that they'd made. Funny story about this is that we were doing this project for Samsung. When we had originally pitched the project, we said Samsung makes these screens. We're going to use the Samsung screens, and it's a great like tie-in where the installation is really about the phone, but even the display technology is a Samsung technology that you guys manufacture and use,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And the way that some of these projects go, it takes 6 months to get approved, and you're talking about it and waiting and seeing what's going to happen.
Or forever, man. Projects like that, they take so long.
Exactly. So they approved the project and they said, "All right, we want to do this." And we did like a month of like getting our, plan together, and we tried to buy these screens, and Samsung had stopped manufacturing these screens.
Oh no, they're like, oh, sorry, that went defunct.
Yep. So we then had to go and find like, well, like what, like how do we get these screens? How do we try to make something like this happen? And we asked Samsung, and of course, Samsung's just so big and vast of a company. It's like the left hand can't even find the right hand, much less talk
Sure.
to it. So we actually managed to find a guy in Los Angeles who had specialized in repairing these screens, and he
Uh,
had enough spare parts that he offered to build us 5 screens that we needed for the Olympics. And I'm
interesting.
sure we paid him like triple what the like list price was for each of them. But they
I
were
mean,
like
whatever.
literally the last 5 screens in the world of that
It
kind.
doesn't. It's not your money. Yeah, man. It's like when there's a desire for an effect. So it's funny because we are bidding on a project with OLED screens and like I didn't put it together in my mind. I'm like, oh right, that is what I was seeing on your portfolio page. But now I'm wondering, like, they've spec'd these screens. Where the hell are we gonna get them? Like, do you know? Is there like are there people manufacturing these things?
These things change so frequently just based off of trends, especially in the business world. I feel like a huge part of the work that I've done has just been kind of staying abreast of what the trends are, what people are trying, what people are experimenting with, and then just jumping on it when you have a moment when it's like, oh, this technology would be great for this project. Like, let's do it while they're still making it.
I mean, what do you think this podcast is all about?
Yeah. There's so much of these like weird technologies that are made at a professional level where you don't have to DIY it, because I mean, as well as I do, like DIYing like a professional project is like
Yeah.
it sucks. Like, you want a support line to call, you want a product that's made, that it works, that like.
Well, I mean, like a lot of what we do is DIY, but it's DIY down to a certain level. Like we're not, yeah, I mean, you are every project that most new media arts projects are DIY in some form if they're any good. You know what I mean? Otherwise, it's like you're just looking at a product. However, you have to base it on a product at some point. You're not manufacturing everything.
Yeah, I mean, I think that especially for our work that's a little more like architectural, like scale, and has like you're expecting a long lifetime for a project. It's not going to be up for 30 days. It's going to be up for 5 to 10 years, maybe longer.
Yeah.
Right. It's like there's definitely a desire for things that are proven in some way.
Yep.
So there's always a trade-off that you're thinking of, like, well, how established is this technology? If I have to replace this thing in 5 years, am I going to be able to replace it? Like, what's the plan for this? And there's definitely times where, I got a crazy idea and I found out that like Toshiba was making this crazy new sensor that I wanted to play with, and I like made my own PCB, programmed my own firmware, got really nuts, and like, really wanted this effect. And it was just a disproportionate amount of time that I spent on like something that maybe wasn't the biggest or most important part of the project.
This is an interesting point to touch on, because I feel like most projects that we get hired because we can do custom PCBs and we can do custom firmware. And we just like, if you're a client and you get a custom thingy from us, like it's never so experimental that it's like it could crash at any moment. It's not like that. It's like custom arrangements of LEDs and drivers. Do you know what I mean? So it's like, it's proven technology. It's just arranged in a different way.
Yeah.
And then if you buy it, you're going to buy 25% extra because that's your 5 years.
Yeah.
There's your 5 years in that pile right there in that box. Like,
exactly.
When a piece fails, you replace it, and that'll last you until it doesn't. And then if there's a desire, then we'll print more.
Exactly. Like, I specifically for my work, I tend to think of the creative technology as almost the creative systems architecture of the project, of how can I take lots of different off-the-shelf parts that are professionally manufactured, but how can I connect them in new and interesting ways? And sometimes part of that process, like part of the digital architecture, is a PCB or some custom firmware or a custom microcontroller board that makes one thing talk to another thing. But usually the kind of key products aren't really, custom in that way. Like the Cadillac project is a really great example of this. Like the Cadillac project is a sculpture, right? It's a ring. It has about 225 rear view mirrors on it, and they're these rear view mirrors that Cadillac actually uses in their car. There's a little toggle switch that turns the rear view camera on, and then goes back to a regular mirror, so you can kind of get three different views.
Yeah.
So they gave us this, and they said, this is a really cool display technology. It has a HD screen built into it in this weird form factor that's like super wide, right?
Right.
What can you guys do with it? And of course, like the first question when you get any kind of technology is like, okay, well, how the hell do I talk to it? Like,
Sure.
how do I get an image on or off of this thing? Right. So that's like the custom integration and the custom systems architecture part. That's like, okay, got to make a microcontroller board. We're going to get the right connectors, the right things, like figure out how to upload and download images. But like the display technology itself was like a manufactured thing, like a
Sure.
manufactured object.
Yeah. And right, exactly. We're not making custom LED diodes.
Yeah.
We are making custom arrangements with LED diodes. We're driving them in interesting ways with custom hardware and custom firmware. Yeah, no, I think that we're on the same page. I think that we're talking about the same thing. Like, don't reinvent the wheel, because the wheel is delicate and it's pretty
Yeah.
fucking fiddly. But do something interesting with the
Well
wheel.
said. The wheel is delicate indeed.
Yeah, exactly. But make an interesting car with it, and that's yeah. I mean, that thing you made with the mirrors, man, that was beautiful, and it was cool because it was interactive. Like, people could come up with it. Describe how that works. So it was like a ring of car mirrors that
Mm-hmm.
almost looked like a wedding ring, but giant. And the wedding ring was made
Yeah, it's
of
like
like
12 feet in
million.
diameter.
Yeah, it was like made of a million car mirrors that were actually LCDs, which is the car mirror that Cadillac uses in their Cadillac or whatever. There's a lot of potential for that. You can take that. It's just a little screen. You do whatever you want with it. You made a big ring and made it interactive.
Yeah. So, I mean, that was you know, I think, again, this is kind of the theme in creative technology work, in my opinion, is the thought, the design of the thought process of like, well, what do you do that's interesting with this? Like, yeah, it's a screen, but like there's tons of ways that you can get screens in tons of different form factors and shapes. For that project, I think that we kind of went down this route of really just trying to think through, this is a part of a car, it's a part of, it's this display technology. Like, what does it mean, what do people feel when they touch a rear view mirror on a car, right? So we started getting these ideas of, you adjust the mirror to get a different view, right? You want to see a little bit to the right, a little bit to the left. So we put a gyroscope on it, a accelerometer on it, so that you could adjust the image that you see. And the other part of it was that this project premiered at Marfa Film Festival in Marfa, Texas, way out in
Right.
the middle of the desert.
Right.
Which really tied into this idea of like road trips, right? Of go to being in a car, like what places can a car take you, right? Like what are the places that you'll go, the things that you'll see. So inside of the ring, we created a three-dimensional model of Marfa, Texas that went through day and night cycles that processed like I think about every 15, 20 minutes. And then we just made each of these mirrors a little, almost like a periscope, like a little view into the 3D world that lived inside of the negative space of the ring. So
Yeah.
it was augmented reality in like a very literal sense, but it was an augmented reality sculpture because there was almost this hidden world inside of the ring that you could only see through the rear view mirrors. And when you would adjust them and move them, you get a slightly different view, and you could see the desert landscape. You could see the herds of bison. You can see the railroad going through the tracks down through the city. Like we built all these kind of little miniatures that moved around and kind of interacted in the environment.
So was that was all like VFX? That was all like animation or CGI that you created a
It was
virtual
all built
environment?
in. Yeah, it was a 3D. It was essentially an animated 3D model that we placed inside of there.
Right, and then the mirrors were windows into that.
Yeah. So it was
Oh,
a pretty interesting project in that, unlike most screen walls where you have one computer that you're outputting into lots of displays, we did it in a completely distributed way. So it was actually 225 different computers inside of it that were driving each of the screens. So each
So
one was
each
actually
screen had
running.
its own computer,
Each
and
one,
then each computer had a slice of the model that was adjusted based on the tilt of the mirror.
exactly,
And
exactly.
could you
So
keep it? Could you keep them coordinated that way? Did it like make sense if you stepped back and looked at it?
yeah, so we did. So there were 225 Raspberry Pis, a Raspberry Pi controlling each screen. And
Mm.
then there was one master Raspberry Pi that was just the clock. Like it was just the world clock. And all it did was broadcast over UDP this is the time, these are the events, it's time for the like railroad to start, and then it would tell all 225 to like start the railroad animation. Like
So
start.
wait a minute. Were you running a 3D model on each Raspberry?
Yeah.
And you were rendering a 3D model in a Raspberry?
Yeah.
Interesting. I had like, dude, those things are fucking crazy.
Oh
Those
yeah,
things are so amazing.
Absolutely insane.
What was the environment that you were doing that in? What 3D environment can you run on a Raspberry?
It was built in Cinder and just OpenGL. So I mean, the models were originally built in Unity and kind of building out the set, and then it was exported and then imported into Cinder and just kind of run.
And Cinder runs on Linux.
Yeah, yeah, it's a C++ framework, like open frameworks or processing, and it runs on Linux.
Wow.
It has a specific branch specifically for Raspberry Pis, which is really clutch for creative coding projects like this.
That is crazy, man. That's such a cool way to do that project. Very, very, very interesting. Very nicely done.
Awesome.
I wish I could see it. Is it still running?
No, unfortunately not. It's one of those, as a lot of marketing projects go, it's one of them that has kind of a short life cycle.
Yeah.
So it toured and kind of, there was a couple of different activations that it came out for, and now I think it actually lives at Gentex Corporation's headquarters. So Gentex is the technology manufacturer that actually makes the glass for Cadillac. So they make the rearview mirrors.
Right, right. Yeah, in the video that described the project, it seemed like you guys had partnered with the mirror manufacturer who was Gentex. And
yeah, exactly. They were a huge part of just, being able to give us all the information that isn't usually made public. When you buy a car and it has a camera in it or whatever, they don't give you the data sheet for all the stuff in the car. So
no, of course not.
So Gentex was great at just giving us all the information we needed to be able to make it happen.
Very cool, man. That's very cool. So in that project, did you like scale up your team, or was it just you, your wife, and?
Well, that was a project that we did at Midnight Commercial, but that was like 4 people that were probably doing most of the work on that. So it was not a big team.
Yeah. Yeah. That's cool. So what are you working on now?
Well, we just finished a project at the Tate Modern. I think
that's right. Yeah.
Did you take a look at it, or?
I did. It's really cool. Tell me about that. Like I looked at it and I like saw it, but I don't think I understand really what it's all about. It was much more abstract to me anyway than the Cadillac installation.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the more abstract projects that we've worked on. So the Tate Modern does a big arts commission every year, the Hyundai Commission. And the idea is that it's supposed to be a large arts commission for an emerging fine artist that gets to make a commission for the Turbine Hall, which is this giant space at the Tate Modern. So the Tate Modern used to be a power generation station on the Thames River in London. And the power station was converted to a museum, but the Turbine Hall is still just the room where all of the equipment used to live. And it's huge. It's like 450 feet long, like over 100 feet tall, like 75 feet wide. Like it's like 5 or 6 stories tall. And it's just this absolutely cavernous space. So you can do some really interesting and ambitious work with, a space that big.
Yeah.
So I was working, my company, Sidara Systems, we were working with Annika Yi, who is the artist that was selected for this commission. And she's been doing a lot of work recently exploring the idea of artificial intelligence and our relationships with it. So kind of the central thesis that we came up with for this project was that we wanted to kind of decenter how we think of humans and artificial intelligence, because the way that we think about artificial intelligence is really just based off of a lot of the seminal like 1950s science fiction, where we always think of them as like androids, as like being shaped like humans, as possible as replacing humans and having human-like intelligence, right?
Right.
Like, this is where the like Elon Musk like AI is going to destroy the world comes from. Is like we think about well, what would I do if I was an AI? Right?
Right.
Like if we created another human, what would happen? So as a part of this project, we wanted to kind of ask people to think about like what are other kinds of intelligence? Like what are other things that might seem intelligent that don't seem like humans? So we created a fleet of autonomous life forms, really, of robots that have their own artificial intelligence built into them. They have their own perception, their own motivation, their own behaviors, and they do all of it fully autonomously. And they just lived in the turbine hall for 3 months.
Interesting. So like what are give me an example of some of the forms of AI that you created, or like some of the forms of robot?
Yeah, so there's two species of robot that live in the hall, right? They're both actually they're based loosely off of jellyfish.
I was going to say an octopus better be in there.
Yeah, jellyfish actually, because jellyfish have a really interesting life cycle, right? Where they used to think that there's two forms of jellyfish. There's the polyp, which is this little kind of organism, kind of like a coral, and then there's the medusa, which is the thing with the tentacles that everyone thinks of, right?
Right.
And they used to think that the polyps were just the babies, and they grew up into a tentacled jellyfish. And they found out fairly recently, that this isn't actually the case, and that they actually just have two completely parallel adult forms. And depending on the environment and how much food is available, the water temperature, like dozens of different things, a jellyfish might grow up into a tentacle or it might grow up into a polyp.
That's so weird, man. And it's funny because jellyfish are basically aliens, and are they even like they're so far from what I would consider an intelligence,
Yeah.
They're almost like they're alive, but they're like kind of like just floating through life. They're not doing much.
I've spent 2 years reading every behavioral science paper I can find on jellyfish, and I can tell you they are way more interesting and complex than I think anyone's ever expected. Like,
are they?
Like
how are they? Yeah, tell me. Give me like a fun fact about the fucking about a jellyfish.
I mean, besides having two forms, they just have so much intentional behavior.
Yeah.
Right? Like they actually can navigate the environment, and they come into different levels of the water, like different heights and depths of water depending on the time of day.
Yeah.
They actually can form group behaviors where groups of jellyfish will do circles around each other.
Oh, interesting.
Just like almost like a flock or a schooling behavior.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
They can detect chemical receptors and pheromones in the water and navigate based off of those. Like they can even like smell prey and like move.
So they do navigate. They are like intentional with their like mobility.
Yeah, it's just, and in ways that I think a lot of people don't think of. Like I definitely thought of jellyfish as like, oh, they're just kind of like blobs of nerves with tentacles, and they just move around, and they don't have intention. They just respond to stimuli, right?
Yeah. That's kind of what they seem like. They're just like floating around. Sometimes they get stuck in the engine of your boat.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, we created kind of two different behavioral models for them, for these robots that look like jellyfish, and the tentacled ones, they're called xenojellies. They are really interested in humans. And the way that we like to think of it is that they're xenophiles. So they like things that are different from themselves. And as kind of machines that fly, like I think you've seen it, these things actually fly.
Well, the ones that you created in the Tate.
At the Tate, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't know they flew. I thought they were just like suspended, right? They're suspended?
No, they're fully autonomous dirigibles that fly through the space.
Wow. So they're interesting. That's how you gave them flight, is through
they're helium balloons. So they're balloons that are essentially
lighter than air.
Filled with helium. They're neutral buoyancy, so the only time they spend energy is when they move. If the motors aren't running, they just hover in place. And if you want it to move, you just turn the motors on enough to nudge it. Yeah. This company called AirStage in Germany makes them, and those guys are aviation geniuses. Like they have
So you
so
didn't
much.
make you found a product that does that.
we found artisans that make these beautiful art objects. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So our role was that we did a lot of the conceptual design, and then we built the actual artificial intelligence that kind of runs all these things, like the central brain for them.
Yeah. That must have been a cool process. So you got the jellyfish that are attracted to other.
To
You've
humans.
got
Yep.
yeah. What else you got?
And then there's another species called the planulae, and they look kind of like blobular. And
Yeah.
the idea for them is that they're more similar to like fungus or plants or things like that kind of straddle the uncomfortable line of like, are they alive? Are they not alive? Like,
Right.
where do they fall? And they respond to a virtual model of their environment. So the way that we really wanted to think of it was we were thinking of kind of colonial organisms that have groups like ants and bees, and they communicate through their environment by like leaving markers, right? Like ants leave pheromones, bees will do like little dances and communicate to other bees where to go. And we wanted
So
to
kind of like a distributed life form.
exactly.
Yeah.
Um, and we couldn't modify the physical environment because this is a museum with people going in it. And we couldn't have them spray paint and tag the walls of the museum or spray smells on the walls or
Right.
anything like that, right?
We do it light.
We could, but that requires more weight, and that makes the aerodynamics more complicated pretty quickly. And battery life is actually a huge concern with these things.
I'm sure. Yeah.
So we actually gave them a virtual environment, and they leave pheromone track. They essentially leave digital pheromones in the space, and then in the simulation, the pheromones create networks that are kind of like mycelial networks, like fungus or mushrooms, and then the organisms follow the networks to navigate the space.
So how did you visualize that to the audience? If I was in the Tate, would I be able to perceive those digital trails, or was that all kind of behind the scenes?
That's really, I think, one of the key interesting parts of the project is that you have to create enough. You want to create enough intelligence that things look intentional, right? Like they can't be like a Roomba that just like goes and bumps into the wall and turns around and like
Right.
flies again, right? Like, but what feels intelligent or what feels intentional is a really like qualitative thing, right?
Sure.
It's a really like gut feeling of a thing. And to some extent, like you can't give people all the answers. Like a part of the enjoyment that people get is by positing and wondering and guessing like what's happening with this thing. So there's no visualization that you can see. We actually have a couple of prints, and there's a catalog that the Tate Modern made that actually is like the behind the scenes, like how it works, and we have some visualizations of the network there. But if you're just a visitor in the Tate Modern in the Turbine Hall, you don't know exactly what it is, but almost everyone who watches the planulae feels that there's like an intention to them.
Yeah.
Like it's crazy. Like you can talk to them, and people, like 5 out of 5 people that we talked to were just like, oh yeah, like they're definitely like they're in a group, they're all moving in this direction, they're following like something, like they're trying to do something. Like people gave them all sorts of these kind of narratives of like what they were trying to accomplish or why. And I think that's a part of how you encourage people to like open up their idea of like intelligence and like what how artificial life or artificial intelligence might come to be.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, that's how like people who study life on Earth, that's how they had to like tease out how different animals, animal behavior. But so did they look different? Did the jellyfish and the planulae, whatever you call them, do they look like, do they look like different things?
Yeah, they have very different visible behaviors.
But they're both flying. Everything was flying around.
Everything was flying.
Oh, dude, that's so cool, man. What a cool project. And it must have been so fun to create those behavioral models.
Yeah, it was just really fun and really interesting. just from all these different perspectives, right? Of like the natural science research and digging deep into like what are realistic behaviors for these things that people might recognize, right? Because you have to give
Yeah.
people just enough familiarity for them to kind of suspend disbelief. Because if it's
Yeah.
all like, if it's too weird and too alien, people are just like, this thing like fucking crazy robots. What the hell is this?
Well, I think
Right.
that's a good point for most interactive art. You have to, you can't be so abstract where people don't, it doesn't click. You have to give some thread for people to hold on to. Like, oh, okay, like I kind of see what's going on here. Otherwise, it's just noise.
Exactly.
You know, and you kind of have to, you have to tailor your interactivity and your behaviors in such a way that it's intriguing. So there is some need to figure it out, right?
Yeah.
But you can't make it so abstract that people don't get it in like 15-20 minutes.
Exactly. I mean, even shorter than that, right? Like,
Yeah,
I see people
totally.
that like, if they don't get it in 10-15 seconds, if there's not something that they can grab onto, they just shrug and they're like, I don't know, like maybe this art's too smart for me. I just don't get
Right. And this is how we get the ice cream museum.
it.
Oh man, I want to go visit, dude. I can't, yeah, I'm not going to be in the UK, right? It's in the UK.
It's in London, yeah.
London.
We're
Yeah,
we're
not gonna be in
currently
London.
trying to figure out where it might go next.
So you might tour it.
That's the hope. I mean, it's a big project that I think was 2 years in the making, and once you have the whole platform and you have the AI written, you have the machines made, like you want to find a home for them, and you want to get them out there in the world as much as you can.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm just you know, we're actually doing a project in a massive cavernous space right now. It's a ginormous volumetric lighting installation. So like yeah, volumetrics. Um I'm pretty sure, well, I mean, maybe there's an installation opportunity there.
Mm-hmm.
It's a huge cruise ship terminal down in Miami, and
Oh,
it's just like
interesting.
a massive space, and it's like maybe we'll get our deposit first, and then we'll bring it up. We'll see if they bite.
Yeah, I mean, so big spaces is actually one of the biggest kind of requirements because these machines are huge too. I don't know if you could tell from the photos, but they're like 10 feet tall and like 6 feet diameter. Like they're huge.
Whoa, seriously?
Yeah,
Wow. Yeah, I did not get that sense from the pictures.
yeah,
I didn't think they were that big.
yeah. It has to do with the avionics because the helium balloons kind of have this property of the volume is like what, like the length cubed, right? So you need to get them really big for the have enough lift to be able to
Right.
support the weight. And if you make them a certain weight, if they get if you make them a certain size and they're so small, you can't have enough helium for the minimum amount of electronics that you need. So there's
Sure.
this kind of
Yeah.
idea that they don't scale linearly if you make them smaller or bigger. There's kind of an optimal size in the middle.
Yeah. We're doing work with drones these days. We're working with like drone swarms,
Mm-hmm.
and we're doing a Burning Man project with Mamu Mani. I don't know if you know, he did the temple in 2018,
Mm-hmm.
2019, 2019. But I'm really stoked, man, to play with, so I'm really into volumetric mapping. So like
Yeah.
mapping pixels in space, and there is no cooler medium than drones because they're pixels. It's a swarm of pixels that's moving in space.
Yeah.
Tracking those, doing like doing like flocking algorithms with those,
Mm-hmm.
and then mapping content onto that. It's just like the
That's great.
future of, well, it's the future of,
Did you see the drift drone show at Renegade Burning Man?
yeah, that's who's doing the drones for the project. They're actually doing the drones. We're just working on content.
The Studio Drift guys.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Are you going to be there? Are you going to be at Burning Man this year?
I live in Nevada and I'm a hell of a lot closer than I've been for the past 10 years. So maybe.
How did you end up in Vegas? I mean, honestly, that's the last place I would have thought that you would have ended up. Just because, like, I know you from Boston, and then it's like Boston, then San Francisco, and then
well,
then New York, and then
I'm a Los Angelino originally. I'm Los Angeles at heart.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so I grew up in Los Angeles. I moved to Boston for MIT, and after 2 or 3 winters was like, what the hell is this? Like, I need to get back to the sun. And
it only takes a couple of years for you.
Yeah. The first winter is magical. The second winter is fun. And then the first nor'easter, you're just like, I'm out. This sucks. Like,
the first time you have to trudge through like disgusting brown slush on your way to somewhere you need to be. You're like, why am I doing this?
For me, it was the first time I had to shovel my sidewalk, and the snowbanks were taller than me, and I'm 6'2", so I'm a pretty tall guy. And like, when the snowbanks are getting that tall, I was just like, this is out of control. Like, I gotta get out of here. I still was there for like 12 years longer or something. Like, I think I was in Boston for 12 years total. Way longer than I ever expected to.
That's longer than I was in Boston, and I like basically grew up in Massachusetts, and then So anyway, Los Angeles.
I wanted to move back out west. I've been meaning to move back out west for a while, but I was moving during the pandemic, and Los Angeles was just kind of the epicenter of the pandemic right around the time I was moving, and I was moving before the vaccines were public. So, if maybe I do things differently if I knew then what I know now about how quickly things would change. But at that point, it felt like there was really no light at the end of the tunnel. And Las Vegas seemed like a really great kind of medium of, I'm out west, I'm within, a couple hours drive, hour flight of being able to go see my family if I need to go see them. And you just have so much access to the outdoors. I mean, Las Vegas is like 3 hours away from like 5 national parks or something ridiculous.
So I'm a climber, and the Red Rocks, man, we're out there like a couple times a year.
Mm-hmm.
I was just in the past 6 months, I was out there 3 times.
Man, well, you gotta come say hi next time. I live right next to it. I literally live.
I will.
in Summerlin, in the part of Las Vegas right next to Red Rock Canyon.
Wow. So do you own a house?
No, we're renting. Though we're looking about buying now.
Do you have a guest room?
We do.
Okay, well, there you go.
Be a guest.
Yeah, man, absolutely. No, we're out there frequently. We really are, because it's one of the best places to climb on the West Coast, like in the West, the country.
And that's, that level of access to the outdoors is really what I love. I mean, from my front door, I can ride my bike. I can ride a mountain bike less than 10 minutes, and I'm in single track in the open desert.
Wow.
And
that's amazing.
It's like, once a week I do like a 5 to 10 mile like bike ride, like mountain bike single track in the desert, and just go out for a bike ride for like an hour and a half or whatever.
So are you into mountain biking?
I feel like it's a trick question. I'm into mountain biking, and that I really like biking off of the road. I'm not really into the like extreme sports like part of it, like, getting a lot of air and like going through really crazy technical tracks.
Man, because mountain biking scares the shit out of me. It's like when I'm climbing, I'm attached to a rope. On a mountain bike, you're attached to nothing. And so many of my friends have broken their collarbones. I'm just like, fuck that.
Yeah, I'm not, I'm not that adventurous, but I'm also really comfortable on a bike. Like I've literally been on bikes since before I could walk.
Me too, but I have also almost eaten shit on a bike. Mountain biking. Like I've had close calls mountain biking, and I think I'm too reckless is what it comes down to. And I'm, you know what I mean? Like I know I would hurt myself if I
really, it goes well like 5 times in a row, and you're like, all right, this time we're going to go for it.
Exactly. At least when you're climbing, you're attached to like your friend. Yeah. Anyway, we should definitely hang out, man.
Yeah,
Absolutely. I'll be in Vegas, I think. Yeah, we're talking to somebody about doing a project there, so I'll probably be in Vegas in the next couple months.
that's great. And that was the other reason that Las Vegas was a move that felt like it made sense is, I think before the pandemic, more so, I felt that I had to be in New York or Los Angeles to kind of have the media market presence for the kinds of industries that I get work in.
Yeah.
Um, and Las Vegas is a huge entertainment, center. It's a huge retail center. It's a huge like all sorts of these industries that really feel like they're going to start growing real fast. So
Yeah, absolutely.
it's been really interesting to be here because there's just so much growth and activity happening, and even with the way that things are now, like all your meetings are on Zoom anyway, so it's not like I have to physically be in New York to get a job with an agent
No,
in New York or a store in New York.
it doesn't matter. You know what's interesting about Vegas though? Like I think that New York, Boston, San Francisco kind of, those are much more like heady markets. And what I mean by that is markets that are willing to be more abstract and creative with their activations. Vegas is very like, I mean, you live there. It's just like
Mm-hmm.
in your face, splash, like big, you know what I mean? It's, I don't know. We haven't done almost anything in Vegas. We've done almost nothing in Vegas, man. We've done things all over the country and all, in Europe and blah, blah, blah. And we've had no luck, and not in Vegas anyway. And I think it's because there's this group of entrenched companies that have a stranglehold on those large Vegas contracts.
Mm-hmm.
And most of those large Vegas contracts are essentially big media displays.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? They're like big light things or big video things or big combination things, but
yeah.
they're just splashy, bright things, you know?
I mean, the challenge is really that Vegas, to an extent that you couldn't do in a really dense city like San Francisco or New York. Like Vegas is really focused on the scale of the spectacle.
Oh
I
yeah.
mean, and like New York and San Francisco just don't have the kind of space to like be thinking about that scale of an experience for the most part. And
Yeah.
because there are these institutions that kind of have big media monopolies on both space and media and real estate in Las Vegas, there's just kind of a whole nother scale of possibility.
Yeah. Now, I don't know. I haven't seen the New York skyline in a minute. This is kind of embarrassing to say, but like I know that, San Francisco, I want to say it's like, it's doing architectural placemaking and it's trying to be classy about it. No matter what you think of the Salesforce Tower or like whatever, it's like it's still there was some artistic intent there.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean? Like the Bay Bridge, I don't think anybody could argue that the Bay Bridge is not beautiful. It is. It's fucking beautiful. It's
Yeah.
classy. It's shades of white. It's algorithmic. It's classy. It defines the skyline,
Mm-hmm.
And like Vegas is just like bleh.
No, no, not like that at all.
Yeah,
Not like
absolutely.
that at all. I mean, there's
No.
almost no skyline to even speak of. It's kind of insane.
Well, I mean, you go into there's definitely. I mean,
There's the strip. There's the
there is
strip, and that's it.
yes. It is a it is a it is a spectacle that you see whenever you look in that direction, and in that regard it is a skyline,
That's true.
right? But there's not a whole lot of like there's no
There's not a lot of
coordination.
like capital A architecture that you think of. Like there's no
No,
equivalent of like any of these iconic towers or
yeah,
architectural monuments, right?
right. It is definitely like zombie apocalypse in the making. Like
Yeah.
here we come. As soon as that
Like
fucking river runs dry.
the best thing you have in Vegas is like Luxor.
Yeah, 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 yeah. That being said, I would love to do an installation there. I want to make a big bright thing for Vegas. I mean, why not? Anyway, yeah, I mean, so I think that for the like you are a your style is like it's smart, man. Like I don't know how to describe it. You have a very smart aesthetic, right? And it's like I think that it might be lost on Vegas. Do you know what I mean? Because like
I don't disagree.
Vegas is not a smart place. It's just not.
I don't necessarily disagree with that at all. I don't think people are looking for thoughtful entertainment in Las Vegas.
No, but the thing is, it's a cheap place to live. You are surrounded by essentially inexpensive sources of talent and technology. And we live in a Zoom world now, man. Like you take your shit, you sell it to London, New York, Berlin, San Francisco,
Yeah,
LA to a certain extent, you know, and like, yeah, I mean, that's the move. That's what we're trying to do. Except we live in the most expensive place in the world. We're like really doing it wrong. Yeah,
yeah.
man. San
I mean,
Francisco
even
is
just things like having space in Las Vegas is so much easier than it was in Brooklyn.
oh my God, dude. Like I ask myself, like, I feel trapped in a way. Like my team is here. I've collected my team here
Mm-hmm.
and it's so expensive. It's so expensive. Everything's expensive. Labor's expensive. The place that we're in is expensive. Everything's expensive. It's like, well, why? Yeah, but I don't like want to move.
Mm-hmm.
Like I like it here. I do. I like it in the Bay. But it's definitely a difficult place to live.
Definitely, and not to put too fine a point on it, but also like California is just a lot more expensive a state to run a business in than Nevada.
Yeah, it definitely is. It definitely is. Do you think you think you're gonna buy? I'm trying to buy property, and it's
Oof.
really hard. Yeah.
Yeah, my
But I
brother's been
want.
trying to buy a place in San Francisco or Los Angeles for like 6 months, and it's just
Yeah,
miserable.
it's nuts, man. It's totally nuts.
Yeah, we're looking seriously at it. I mean, you know, Las Vegas is one of the most rapidly growing cities in the country right now. It's like top 10. It's just absolutely
Just
insane, like how much they are just popping up houses everywhere here.
I know. Does that mean that it's becoming more expensive?
Definitely. Its rent has gone up 30% since last year.
What do you have a lease, or is it just are you like
No, not
affected
my
by
rent. Like overall, like on
it?
average
Right.
in the city, it's like going up like 30% year over year, which is just insane.
Yeah, that is crazy.
Yeah,
That is
like
crazy.
we got a relatively modest bump in rent. I think they want like $100 more a month from us, but I looked at what it costs on the market, and it's just insane. Like
Yeah.
I'm renting a 3 bedroom house, about 2,000 square feet, which is huge coming from living in a 600 square foot apartment in Brooklyn.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and it was like $2,000 a month when I got here last year, and it's
Oh,
already
wow.
like $2,600 a month now,
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
over 1 year, which just feels like $600 a month in 1 year. Like that's
Yeah.
crazy.
And how long have you been there for?
Just a little over a year
Okay, so you've been there in the summer. How are the summers? 'Cause that's like really what it's like, man, that's
now. It's yeah, I mean,
Boston sucks in the winter, but Vegas must suck in the summer.
yeah, there's no way around it. It's hot as hell.
Yeah.
It was last year. It was weird that June was the hot month instead of usually August is the hottest part of the year
Yeah.
last year, but June was like 117 for like 2 weeks straight, every single day, and it was just
Oh my
like
God.
so miserable. Like
Yeah.
you just leave the AC on 24/7. You stay inside, and you're just like, fuck it, we're not going outside. Like,
Right. Well, you can't. 117 degrees. That's like that's like
yeah,
oven status.
yeah, that's the killer, right? Is like the breeze kicks up, and the breeze actually just makes you even hotter because it feels like a convection oven instead of a cool breeze.
Yeah, man. Absolutely.
It's just
Absolutely.
miserable. So
Yeah, I
it's
want to get
bad.
out.
But like Boston's like that too. Like how like there's at least 3 weeks out of the year where it's like 4 degrees in Boston.
Oh no, no, no. I fully understand. Yeah, it's like you got to go outside in like a spacesuit for at least a couple months of the year. You're just like in the spacesuit, going
Yeah,
to the going to the deli. You're like, okay, got to get my parka, got to get my boots, my gloves, my
yeah,
hat, my goggles. Yeah,
yeah.
it's
So,
definitely
but so it's like I'm not gonna lie, it's not like it's like it doesn't get super hot here, but you know, as they say, at least it's a dry heat.
Man, it is one of the most beautiful cities. That's the thing, though. It's people are like, yeah, they don't understand how close to the most amazing nature you are when you're in Vegas,
Oh,
especially if you're into adventure sports. Like if you're into biking, climbing, hiking, like you cannot beat it.
even since I've moved here, I've gotten really into amateur astronomy. Right.
Oh, cool.
In
I bet you
40
hate Starlink.
in in 45 minutes, I can drive to Valley of Fire State Park, which is dark enough that I can see the Milky Way.
Yeah.
And like clearly, like you can clearly see the Milky Way. You can see the Great Rift, like the black gap that runs through the center of the Milky Way. Like
Right.
45 minutes from a city. Like that's what I love about Las Vegas is like I feel like I have the advantages of living in a more rural place where I can see the Milky Way, I can have national parks nearby, like I can have the open desert. But it's like, if I ever want like avocado toast and brunch cocktails, it's like 15 minutes away.
Okay, so the
It's
last
like
time you went
I
to
still
Vegas,
have like the city amenities, right? Like of like hipster cocktail bars and like brunch places and like fine dining and like entertainment.
yeah.
And it's all like world class entertainment, right?
Well, the last time I went to Vegas, we went for my friend's birthday and we stayed in quote unquote the arts district. And I don't know if you've been to this area, but it's like all of these crazy weird thrift stores and it's actually really cool, man. There's all
Yeah,
these cool cafes and there's like the thrift stores are some of them are like really old, like from the 60s, and
yeah,
these just like very old people who run them and they're like classic thrift stores, but this area is full of them and
yeah.
it's
The
just
Arts District
all
is one of the oldest, like most OG parts of Las Vegas, like from the
it's
original
really
strip.
cool. It's really cool.
Yeah,
And it's yeah, it's I was there and I'm like, huh, I could live here.
yeah. You're just like, huh? Las Vegas is a lot cooler than I thought it was. Like,
Yeah,
I
well,
didn't
I mean,
think Las Vegas had this.
I've known Vegas is cool because of Red Rocks for the past
Mhm.
4 or 5 years. Me and my friend group, we go there every year. It's like a tradition.
Yeah.
Every year we're in Vegas at least a couple times a year for Red Rocks for climbing. Um, I'm actually about to get a. I'm really excited. I'm getting a Forerunner, and we're going on a road trip. And I
All
want to
right.
come through. I want to go through. I want to go through Vegas on my way to Utah and then to Colorado.
All right.
And we should hang out. We should go. You should show me some astronomy. I would love to see it.
Yeah.
I'd love to see like if you have a telescope, I'd love to check it out and like
Yeah. I got a 8-inch Dobsonian telescope. We can just throw it in the back seat of the car and go drive out. Honestly, I just go to Red Rock a lot because it's so close. It's like 15-minute drive, and it's not like Milky Way clear, but like you're not looking at the Milky Way with the telescope. You're looking
can
at
you get in there at night? I thought it was closed at night.
the drive-through is closed where you drive through the park, but
Hmm.
there's a couple of pavilions that are like outside of the park where they just have parking and like covered like tables and stuff like that. And
Gotcha.
you're still far enough. The Red Rock Canyon actually shields you from a lot of the light pollution from the city. So even though you're only like 15 minutes out, it's still like 3 or 4 like levels darker.
Yeah, totally. That's the other reason I love that park is because you feel so separated, but you can always see that goddamn Luxor, that
Yeah.
stupid spotlight. You know that there's a cloud of moths that like
Oh,
circulates a
oh,
mile up,
oh God, I can only imagine. That
and
sounds.
because of that, there's a cloud of bats. So there's like a cloud of moths and a cloud of bats that's like a mile in up in the air
Yeah.
above that fucking pyramid.
But bats, there's a lot of bats out here.
Yeah, where you got a lot of light and a lot of moths.
A lot of moths.
Talk about animal behaviors, man, right
Yeah.
there.
Yeah, I think it blew my mind the first summer night there. I was walking, and I thought it was like a bird flying weird, and I was like, "Oh fuck, that's a bat!" Like shit, we
Yeah,
have bats like in the city, or like
yeah,
like it's kind of suburban, but
They're
still like
very recognizable. And then you've got coyotes too. I mean, you had those in New York. Like they're in San Francisco too. They're everywhere.
we have
Coyotes
mountain
are just like,
lions too.
really?
Yeah.
In the city? No way.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I live in the edge of the city, right? I live, 10 minutes into the city. They come in and they get lost in the city parks and stuff, and just like animal control has to come and they'll put out an alert. They're like, if you live in the, Paseos neighborhood, like you should stay inside for a little while. We're currently like tranquilizing a mountain lion and trying to bring it back out.
Have you seen them? I've never seen a mountain lion.
I haven't seen one in person, but I've definitely seen the reports on the news, and they've been like 5 blocks away from where I live.
Yeah. I want to see one at some point. That's like, I love cats.
It's always one of those things where I'm like, I really want to see one like in the wild because it'd be awesome, but it might also be a really bad situation if I found one in the wild.
Oh, 100%.
Right? It's like
Definitely.
that might be the last thing I see.
It could be.
Yeah, I'm a huge like wildlife enthusiast. Like, there's a whole alternate reality. When I was a kid, I wanted to be a biologist and be like a natural biologist, like a naturalist.
Yeah.
Somehow, my alternate career of going to MIT and being a technologist happened instead.
Yeah.
But I still like, I go on a bike ride in the desert and I'm like, I hope I see a rattlesnake today.
I mean, if you're up on a bike, it's no big deal. If you're walking around, you're like, oh shit, don't bite my leg, please.
Yeah. Like, I definitely like just even going out like scorpion hunting at night and like trying to find them. And we got a lot of those too.
I was gonna say those fuckers are everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, you see a lot of those.
Oh yeah. Any given night, there's like 3 to 5 in our backyard, like easily. Though the ones at Red Rock, or not Red Rock, Valley of Fire, are like insane. They're like the size of like a computer mouse.
I've actually never been out to Valley of Fire. I would love to go.
Yeah, let's do it next time you're here. Let's go out, bring a telescope, look at some stars, look at some rocks.
Find some scorpions.
Yeah. Sounds like a plan.
Absolutely, man. Listen, we've done an hour and 45. I think this is like a successful podcast.
All right.
I'm glad you did this, man. This is fun. It's good to catch up, and it's good to like get to know you better.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great.
Cool. Well, let's hang out soon. I'll be in touch. This will probably be edited in the next like 2-3 weeks. So I'll shoot you a message when we get it edited.
Yeah.
And I'll let you review it before we publish.
Cool. I was gonna ask, I was like, is this just like, do you just publish like an hour and 45 of us rambling, or how much editing?
Absolutely, 100%. That is exactly what this is.
Raw poke, uncut.
Well, we're talking about new media arts. Yeah, pretty much.
I love it.
Anyway, man, I'm glad we got to talk, and I'll let you review before we publish.
That sounds great. And yeah, let's just stay in touch. It's always fun to hear about what's going on in each other's lives and see how things are evolving and changing.
Yeah, it is, absolutely. All right, brother. I'll talk to you soon.
Take care.
All right, bye.